Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Richardson. I'm going to be continuing our journey through the GI tract today. I'm going to be talking to you about the large intestines. I started you out with the beginnings, with the oral cavity, the esophagus, and now I'm going to finish you up. This is, you're thinking about the GI tract. It is one large continuous tube. It is from the mouth to the anus. So we're at the final portion of the journey of the food that you ate until the parts that you cannot take in, parts that we can't digest, the remains are going to be passed out of the body. So here at this point, this is the last final portion of the small intestines, the ileum. As it joins here, we change, of course, into the large intestine. This will, of course, be the cecum. At this point, as we ascend, this, of course, the ascending colon. This will be on the right side of the patient. It will take a hairpin right turn and become the transverse colon. We call this the right colic flexure. Sometimes it's simply called the hepatic flexure. At this point, we're passing through here. At the left turn, we can call this the left colic flexure, or it sometimes is also known as the splenic flexure, simply because the spleen is in this position on the left of the patient. This section of the colon is the descending. This very short segment here has a slight curve to it, so it gets called the sigmoid colon because of this slight, I guess, S kind of curve to it. And then the final straight portion is the rectum, and then the final opening to the outside is, of course, the anus. Now, the entire large colon is very different than the small intestine. It's obviously much larger in diameter, but it is not actually as long. So we don't have as much length. It is not as compacted into a small area. So we only have anywhere from 4 to 5 feet in length for this particular section of the intestines. Now, functions-wise, we're doing several things. We do absorb some things here in the large intestine. Typically, it's any remaining water that is in these undigested food remnants, and a few electrolytes that are still present. We can absorb a few vitamins that are present here. In particular, the most important one is vitamin K. Vitamin K is produced by some of the normal flora in the large intestine, particularly by E. coli, and vitamin K is needed for clotting factors for the blood. Of course, the large intestines are going to store these food residues, these waste products, as they are processed, as they pass through the large intestines. We're going to store them and change them to what we know, of course, is feces. These are going to be eliminated from the body. And feces themselves are considered a semi-solid rather than a solid. There's more water present than you think. So at least 75% water is still present that will allow it to pass from the body. Okay. Now, if we look inside, if we look at the histology, we look at the tissue itself, we see that it has to be a little bit different for its functions. Again, you're still going to have the same 4 layers that I talked about earlier in the introduction. You are going to have this mucosa layer. It is going to be lined with epithelium. But here we're going to see that the mucosa is thicker. We're having to deal with a thicker substance that is passing through, contractions that are during elimination. So we want this innermost lining to be a little bit thicker. You're going to notice a high number of these crypts, these pits that are studding this inner surface of the large intestine. And they're going to only produce a very few things. They don't produce the enzymes, the hormones, all that's needed for digestion, because that's not taking place here. We're going to produce a little bit of bicarbonate to help neutralize the pH, balance it out. There's going to be a lot of goblet cells. Goblet cells are going to turn out mucus. Okay? So we need this mucus to help lubricate the passage of the feces, to make it easier for things to pass. So as you look at this innermost lining, you see a very different kind of surface here. All right? But still notice that we do have the muscularis externa. We do have these layers of muscle that are, of course, going to be involved in moving things through. So we have to have some way for movement to occur. Now, another thing that you're going to notice is that the large intestines are, of course, much larger. So the diameter is anywhere from 3 to 4 inches from side to side. So much larger than the diameter of the small intestines. And again, I already told you there's lots and lots of these crypts or pits present, but you're going to notice that we do not see any villi. There's no villi extending from here. That's not happening. you don't notice any circular folds. So when you look at the inside here, you'll see that it's a very smooth surface. We don't have that rippling effect that you saw in the small intestine. Again, you don't see any villi. Surface is fairly flat. And you don't see any microvilli. The microvilli, of course, would be on these individual little cells right here, these epithelial cells. They're not there. The whole purpose of all three of these things is for surface, to increase the surface area, to increase absorption. And we don't do that here. There's no nutrient absorption taking place in the large intestine, so there's no need for all of this type of anatomy. So you're going to see a very different look to the inside of the large intestine because of the functions that it does. So of those essential activities that I discussed in the introduction, the ones that are occurring here, you're always going to have propulsion, this forward movement. So we're going to have peristalsis here. You're going to see the forward movement of the waste products. Now, chemical digestion, we're not going to see digestion of food products in any absorption. So the only example of a chemical digestion would be by bacteria. There's always going to be living bacteria within the large intestine. And here you can see this figure. They say as many as 10 million different species and types can possibly populate the large intestine. So lots and lots of bacteria are always alive, producing, living in our colon. So the type of digestion that they are doing, certain remnants of food that we cannot digest. One is cellulose. This is a substance found in plant material that humans, we do not have an enzyme to break that down. The bacteria can. So when they break this down, they produce byproducts. And of course, some of their byproducts are hydrogen gas, CO2, and we have some methane. So of course, all of that is producing intestinal gas. Upwards of 500 to 1,000 milliliters a day, and that's just average. Most of it is either unnoticed or can be noticed. But anyway, intestinal gas produced mainly because of the bacterial digestion going on. Absorption, again, I've already mentioned. We do absorb a little bit in the large intestine, but it's going to be water, a few vitamins, minerals, not the nutrients that you're thinking of like proteins, fats, sugars. That's taking place in the small intestines. And of course, the huge activity that's got to take place here is elimination. We're going to eliminate the feces. And the feces themselves, we've said that it's a semi-solid material. We are looking at food residues that we cannot break down, that the bacteria have not been able to break down. We have lots of mucus that's easing the passage that we produced here in the large intestine. Now, as the remnant, these waste products pass, they're literally going to scrape the sides. So some of the epithelial cells in the large intestine will get sloughed off, and they will be found in the feces as well. Of course, lots and lots of bacteria in the feces themselves. And of course, fairly high amount of water. About 75% of the feces will be water. Now, why are feces brown? And typically, normally, we see this color. Well, we go back to the bile production. We know that bile is produced in the liver. We know it's stored in the gallbladder. Its function is to help break down fats in the foods that we eat. So gallbladder releases some of this into the small intestine after we eat a fatty meal. So obviously the bile is now in the intestinal system. So the body's fairly good at recycling this. We're able to resorb most of the components of the bile. We reuse this. So it's recycled sometimes as much as 4 and 5 times during a meal. So it's very quickly reabsorbed, processed back by the liver, and reused. But there is one product here called bilirubin. This is a waste product from the breakdown of old blood cells. Blood cells are constantly being taken out of circulation in the spleen, sometimes in the liver, and we're going to have this product called bilirubin that we do not need, and it is actually put into the bile as a pigment, a bile pigment. So this particular product, as it makes its way through the intestines, will not be reabsorbed. So the bilirubin gets converted by the bacteria into something called stercobilin, and this is brown. So this is why we see this typical brown color, and it's due to this process of breaking down hemoglobin. Okay. All right, as we pass through the large intestines, we're going to start with the cecum. This is a swollen area at the base of the ascending colon. So this is on the right side. If you get your oriented here, this is the ascending colon. So we can label this here. Okay, so ascending. So as food builds up in the last portion of the small intestine, this would be the ileum, the pressure will cause this sphincter muscle here to relax. So we call this the ileocecal valve. The sphincter itself will be a ring-like sphincter muscle, which is, of course, a smooth muscle. It will relax, allow a certain amount of food residues to pass into the large intestine. And obviously, we do not want food to go backwards. So there is this is only a one-way valve. It's only going to go forward into the cecum. Now, hanging off the cecum is something called the appendix, or the vermiform appendix. This is a blind-ended tube that basically causes a few problems for some people. Some people, very common to develop an infection or inflammation of the appendix. One of the reasons is that this particular structure is very twisty, and sometimes food particles, waste, and lots of bacteria can set up an infection here, can become blocked off, and it can swell and cause an appendicitis. The true danger is, of course, if this ruptures and you get feces and bacteria out into the body cavity, and this is, of course, very dangerous and life-threatening at this point. Now, in the past, the appendix has been considered a vestigial organ, and that word means that it once had a function, but it no longer does. Okay? That it was some type of remains of something that once had an important function. Nowadays, there are a little bit more thought that the appendix might have a better role in life. Now, of course, you can live without an appendix. A lot of people live very well, do not notice they're missing it. But it's been found that there are masses of lymphoid tissue within the appendix, and this could serve to help protect us, the role in the immune system. Another theory is that it is a storage site for the good or innocent type bacteria in the large intestine. So that if you have a person who is going along fairly normally, and then all of a sudden they come in contact with some type of food poisoning, they've ingested some type of bacteria that sets up an infection within their intestines. The body usually reacts. Diarrhea is a very good, quick way for the body to get rid of everything within the intestines. That'll serve its purpose. We've gotten rid of all the bad pathogenic bacteria, but we've lost all the good bacteria. This can also happen, say a patient takes a round of strong antibiotics, kills off all the normal healthy bacteria in the intestines. So one theory is that the appendix acts as a little area to save up, just a little storage area for the good bacteria, the innocent kind that don't cause an infection. And that after you have lost all the other contents, all the other bacteria, the good bacteria repopulate the large intestine and you recover. Okay, so that's been one theory for one of the reasons we have an appendix. There are a couple things that are unique to the large intestine. One of them is something called epiploic appendages. They are these little fat pouches that hang off the sides of the large intestine. They are basically extensions of the visceral peritoneum with fat in it. They say they're no known function, but obviously we're storing a little bit of fat there. And if you remember, the visceral peritoneum is this outermost layer, the serosa, that is going to be part of the double-layered peritoneum that's connecting you here to the wall of the abdominal cavity. Okay. Another thing that is unique to the large intestine is something called the Taenia coli. These are found on the outside of the large intestine. You'll see it looks like a ribbon, but what it is actually smooth muscle, and it's running in a longitudinal direction, so that when you get a contraction and you pull this large intestine inward in this direction, you get this bulging of the sections, and that's what gives it that look that it has. It's not smooth. It has these kind of protrusions along the edges, and they have a special name. Of course, they're haustra. If you have more than one, it's haustra. If it is singular, it is haustrum. Okay, so that will help you with your spelling. Now, as food passes, the haustra play a role in helping mix the food. We have something called haustral contractions. So they don't last very long. They will kind of create a movement where they help push the food into the next haustrum. So as it does this, it's helping to mix the food, or I'm sorry, the remnants, the waste products a little bit, and allows a little bit longer time for the absorption of water to take place. Now, as food is passing through the body, as you eat a large meal, we've got to have some way to signal the large intestine to make room for this next meal that you've eaten. So in the stomach, if you've been learning about the hormones that are being produced, gastrin is produced in the stomach. It is going to target several different things. One of the targets, of course, is parietal cells. We're going to increase hydrochloric acid, helps break down proteins, helps increase digestion, but it's also going to target our large intestines, and it's going to signal that we need to make room for this next meal. Okay? So we call these, and they're special movements called mass movements. So large, prolonged peristalsis. This is where we have a lengthy type movement, where we're getting this definite forward movement of a large mass of undigested food. So it's going to take place maybe 3 to 4 times a day. All right, and they can last anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. So these are very slow kind of bolt type movement, and typically the whole process can vary between person to person, but anywhere from 30 to 40 hours to process this through the entire colon. All right. Okay. Now the very last part, as this mass movement takes place, the last portion, of course, is a little bit of the sigmoid colon here. But when it reaches the rectum is normally empty. All right? Until we have a mass movement, there is nothing in the rectum. So this will be the final storage place for the mass of feces. So when the feces enters the rectum, it will stretch or distend this part. And there are mechanoreceptors, these nerve receptors in the lining that will sense this. You'll have there will be a spinal reflex in which we will automatically relax the internal muscles of the anus surrounding the opening. So these internal muscle sphincter type cells, these are smooth muscle. So they will automatically relax. Now, surrounding this are the external anal sphincter muscle. And these are consciously controlled. This is skeletal muscle. So you will not relax these muscles until you consciously decide to have a bowel movement. So at this point, we can control when the elimination takes place. So you have 2 different types of muscle involved in the anus itself. Okay. Now, some of the disorders that you will find throughout the large intestines, one is diverticula. This is kind of a bulging of the wall. If you have someone who has built up food it's moving too slow, there'll be an increase in pressure. And what that does is it pushes on these walls, and it can cause them to bulge outward and become very weak. And the danger is, of course, that they rupture. So if it becomes weak enough and this opens up, then feces, bacteria can come out into peritoneal cavity. And of course, this is very, very dangerous. So diverticula are due usually to a diet that's low in fiber. You have someone who the food waste products are not moving through the intestines very fast, and they stay there too long. So you have this danger of diverticulus. Now, another problem lies with death of tissue. We can have changes that occur in the intestines due to physical movement. This is a hernia. In this case, a hernia is simply when a body part comes out of where it's supposed to be. In this case, it protrudes through the muscles. There's been a weakening in the abdominal muscles for some reason. It could be due to surgery. It could be to muscle strain. It can happen during pregnancy. So for some other reason, the intestines have protruded through the muscle. And if it is tight enough, we can cut off the blood supply, and that leads to necrosis, which is death of tissue. Okay? The intestines can twist. Again, this would cut off the blood supply and death of tissue. This can happen to the large intestine or the small intestines. Intussusception, this is due to peristalsis gone wrong. At this point, the forward movement not only is pushing the food forward, but the intestines themselves telescope into the next section. And as this happens, if these muscles here continue to squeeze, they can cut off the blood supply of the walls of the intestine in here. And again, this is a very dangerous condition as well. At the end of the GI tract, you can have something called hemorrhoids. This sometimes will be simply swollen blood vessels at the exit point here, and at times they can rupture, leading to a condition called hematochezia. All right, this is where you will see some bright red blood with the stool. Now, one of the reasons I bring this up is because there's another condition called melena that's very different and a very serious condition. And this is blood in the stool, but at this point it's a very dark color. You're not going to see the bright red. So it's a very different way of thinking about this, because bacteria has had time to change the hemoglobin and it becomes very, very dark. And the reason this is important is because melena is telling you that you have bleeding much higher up. Because remember, this GI tract is one long tube. So if, let's say, you've had a tonsils cut out, there's still some bleeding going on, okay? Or it could be something serious as some type of cancer, an obstruction, bleeding ulcers in the stomach. You could have tears within the esophagus, esophageal varices. These can often rupture. So all of these things, we're getting bleeding much higher up in the system. So the blood is passing through with the food, with the feces, and the bacteria have time to change it. So there's a difference in where the blood is coming from. So that can be important in diagnosing problems within the GI tract. Okay. So a lot of things, I appreciate your time, and I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the large intestines, and thank you very much.